At this point, I want to open it up for questions, answers, discussion, sharing of experiences. I've got some questions in my mind that we could discuss, but frankly, right now I want to open it up and see if you all have any questions for Bethann or John or Vicki or anybody else, and possibly share if you've done some interesting partnerships or data use or data sharing. Let us hear from you. First question, are there any suggestions related to strategies for special education data managers to connect with data managers in charge of SLDSs? That's an interesting issue because, as we all know, we get into our silos and it's hard sometimes to cross program areas. Hopefully some data governance will involve people from different program areas. But Bethann, or do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, I think we can use things like EdFacts, the EdFacts requirement to bring some of these folks together. Our special ed data is completely integrated with our general ed data, and we're, the same people are actually working through this. And I think I mentioned a special ed study that we're doing. So we don't have that problem. And then the follow-up question to that is the barriers to support the Part B indicator data collection, and that would involve bringing on another agency into the SLDS. We're actually just having discussions about that right now, but because that has to happen, they're more likely to participate.
Okay, thanks for that. If y'all have any comments or responses, that please type them in. One other question is, how do we get past the K-12 centricity model? For me, that really depends upon what you're talking about. I mean, because a lot of the SLDS grants have been focused on developing a K-12 data system for K-12 data use. In the last round or two of the SLDS grants, it's been focused, the focus has expanded to the P20, that is, early childhood through college and even graduate school into the workforce. So really, depending who you talk to in a state, that will kind of affect whether you're getting a K-12 focus or the P20W focus, depending upon what the grant is. Or mostly your research question will guide who you need to talk to within a state and within an organization. A lot of the K-12 SEA folks are very integrally involved in the P20W grants, and actually they are the fiscal agents for those grants. So they're usually involved, but a lot of the university systems manage the P20W grant as well. So I think it's really, it kind of depends upon what you want to get done or what data you need access to and who you talk to in terms of that.
Yeah, I'll add, Nancy, that as a condition of receiving the stimulus funds, governors agreed to link data with higher education for indicators C11 and C12.
Yeah.
So that provides impetus.
Exactly. Another question is, an outside researcher who works with state agencies to access education data. I'm excited to see Virginia's researcher guide to using the VLDS. Is anyone aware of analogous efforts in other states? I'll need for you all to type in your responses if you're in a state that has similar types of guides out there. I know Hawaii has researcher consortium involving the DOE and the REL and a lot of universities. I was out there in December, and they have a piece of their website that identifies their research, the priority questions, the processes to go through for requesting data. I mean, just a whole lot of information out there. So that's one source. If you have resources out there, please type it in the chat pod to share with folks. So Trudy follows up with an interesting question. How do you get the P20 SLDS grant past the K-12 centric perspective? That's an interesting question and sounds a little state experienced or lessons learned experience. Because I've certainly worked with a lot of folks where there's a whole lot on the post-secondary through the P20 and not as much on the K-12, depending, you know, because I think it's a state-specific challenge, and so we might want to follow up, or if you're dealing with a particular state, you might want to follow up with us, and we can see how we can help you think through that. Any update on the status of USDA, U.S. Department of Ed work to develop guidance on the use of student free and reduced price lunch eligibility data, and what is the Virginia practice in responding to requests for this data? Bethann, I'll let you tackle that because I don't.
Oh, great. We actually, we don't have a free or reduced indicator on our student record. We have an economically disadvantaged indicator. And that can be released under certain circumstances, but we're very careful about how we report that number, particularly in the aggregate. And to be disadvantaged, you have to be eligible for TANF, Medicaid, and food stamps.
One response was focusing on the transition points and feedback reports might help take the focus off K-12 centric through the whole P20W. Absolutely. I know a lot of states are developing and testing out their high school feedback reports. Different states. I know work I've done in Alaska, they've really worked with the K-12 and the post-secondary and the workforce to identify key policy and research questions that affect each of them and the transitions. Hawaii focuses, their P20 focuses on transition and lets the source system deal with a lot of their own sector-specific questions. So there's lots of ways to get outside of the K-12 centric thing, but again, that sounds like a targeted question based on your experience with the states. We might need to look at that. One question that was submitted before the webinar was one I know that we all have to deal with, responding to confidentiality concerns from mid-level administrators in various state agencies that are sources of needed data. I know sometimes, you know, based on long-term relationships, somebody in one program area might have a contact outside of the state agency who's used to calling them up and getting answers to questions, maybe some data, hopefully not data. Hopefully we're changing that practice. But you've got to have a process for how everyone in the agency understands responding to data requests, what's approved, what's the data source, who gets to decide whether they get the data or not. And if, you know, for the past 20 years, you know, John Smith in whatever organization has always called up somebody in special ed and gotten a quick answer, that might need to change now. I say that might kind of facetiously. I think it needs to change now. You all get to decide that for your state. So what are the processes? And to me, that falls under data governance a lot and developing the processes for responding to data requests, reviewing, approving, and confirming the appropriate data sources, and then the communication about that. I think we have to find a way to significantly reduce that, you know, one-off call to your favorite person to get some quick answers. Bethann, how have you dealt with that?
Yeah, that can be a problem, Nancy, and people do make mistakes. What we do is on every standard report that we have, if there are small cells, if there's individual student data, there's a caution right on the report that says, you know, this shouldn't be shared because it might identify students. Then when we do ad hoc requests for folks in the agency, we put something similar on that request because we don't know when someone from the agency asks us for data, we don't know what they're going to do with it. You know, if it's for themselves or if it's for giving out to someone. And so we try to, and we're getting a little bit better at policing things as well when we get suspicious. The other thing we have is mandatory annual training for all employees and contractors, and within that training, that's specifically addressed.
Okay. Thanks, Bethann. And John, if you have anything to share, please jump in there. Let's see, I'm trying to figure out, one question I see, is there a preferred database application software for viewing longitudinal data? Again, from my take, and Bethann and John can respond, these things are so state-specific, and the longitudinal data systems are state-specific, and the data is not just readily shared. I think there's a lot of reports that are published, but having access to longitudinal data, if I'm reading the question correctly, I don't think there is. And I think with the apps for VA, you know, all of the things that Bethann has done has shown that we don't necessarily want to rely on one software. We want a lot of creative solutions. But I really think even before you get to which software to view the data is what's available in your state or from each state agency and in what format. Bethann, John, what's your take on this question?
Well, our VLDS is very database agnostic. It doesn't really care what kind of database you're using. For example, in my agency, we use Oracle, and then in the higher education agency, they use Microsoft SQL Server. So it really doesn't care. But I think the database is not necessarily as important as the tools that you are using to view the software. We have been using a tool called LogiXML. If you go to our website, there are several reports there using LogiXML. We're still not happy with it, and we're looking at some other products right now that might give us better visualizations and more drill-down capability for the end user. So those kind of things, I think, are most important.
Okay, another question, how will the importance of sharing data with the public and families be addressed, as well as sharing information about what the data means, thank you for that, and how families and communities can use the data to advocate for policies and practices that build strong school-family partnerships. I think that a key point to that is how do we make sure that people interpret and apply the data correctly. No small feat there. Bethann, you want to tackle that one?
Yeah, that one's a good one, and it's something that concerns me. We do some research, and that informs policy, and our Board of Education has made policy decisions based on some of the research we've done. But it can also inform parents and students. And we recently came out with a report that showed that students with advanced diplomas were more likely to enroll and persist in a four-year institution than students who just had a standard diploma. And I think that's really good information for parents and students to have as they start to plan through their middle school and high school years. Getting that advanced diploma takes longer and it's a little bit harder work, and you have to start early to work on it. So what we've tried to do, and I'm not going to say we're successful yet because we're still talking in researcherese, but we're trying to do like one-page briefings that we can share with schools about some of the significant results of the research. We've also talked about doing some short YouTube videos as well.
I like that. I think we should take over YouTube. Another question, what are some of the emerging data elements being considered for the future? What are some of the trends for visualization of the data, which I think also will help the how we present the data will help with the ease of interpretation and application of the data. Rows and columns of numbers may thrill a few of us involved because we're data people, but I think most consumers of our data need it in bite-sized chunks that are relatively intuitively obvious, or else we may be at risk for how people use the data. So Bethann or John, what do you all see as some of the emerging data elements, different types of reports, and useful ways of visualizing or presenting the data?
To the data elements question, I think we're really looking at early childhood. I just this morning stumbled across a paper that came out in December from the Quality Initiatives Research and Evaluation Consortium. They're calling it a data toolkit, and I think it was funded by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. That document is great. It identifies not only specific data elements that are needed, but it identifies an indicator and how to calculate that indicator with the data elements. I haven't read all of it, but I think it's going to be a really good document.
Yeah, that sounds great. John, do you have anything?
Well, I mean, I agree. Early childhood is really the next major thing. And then for those who haven't gotten there, adding at the other end of the spectrum, income and earnings data, which is also very, very popular, particularly with policymakers. The trick for data visualization and doing reports is quite honestly one I have not seen anybody master yet. I think it's still to be determined. I think that the goal is probably for a state agency or somebody who has hold of the data to really produce a lot of pre-developed reports that are graphical and user-friendly in order to prevent people from going in and messing with the data and coming up with different analyses that maybe don't make sense. The question of the misuse of data that came up earlier tends to happen when people can't find what they want and then go kind of running through the data looking for something that makes sense to them without really understanding the structure. So developing canned reports, developing data cubes that allow people to cut data in simple ways and produce basic sort of 2x2 type tables and graphs will, I think, help both reduce the likelihood of misuse, but also increase the likelihood of people understanding what they're seeing.
Those are great points. And as you were talking, I was thinking one of the resources we have at the end of the PowerPoint is the Colorado Growth Model, which is kind of unique because it used bubbles to reflect student growth and school and size of groups and stuff. And Arkansas had a Hive visualization around using data. So I think some states have come up with some really good, unique visuals. I don't think they're standards, but I think it's going to be it's incumbent upon us to come up with good visuals that are relatively intuitively obvious. And frankly, I wonder if that's an area that many of us are educators, many of us are data people or programmers, analysts, but the visually creative people might be in a different field, or they might be some of those external organizations that we need to partner with. You know, the really, really hot, hip users of computers that come up with great visuals. I don't know. I don't know how to find them or if we're the ones who've got to stretch our minds, but that will be interesting. And if any of you come up with great examples, please share. We've got a few more minutes left before we need to wrap up. I want to go through some of the questions that I had generated just to kind of pose, see what you all have to say, prompt your thinking. One of the key questions I think to come out of this is around engaging researchers, and how does your state do it? Do you have a plan yet? Do you have a process yet? How do you even identify them? Does the squeaky wheel get your attention? You know, the research or the research organization that constantly is asking for things? Have you developed a clear set of priority research or policy questions that everything, if it's related to that, it jumps up on the priority list? And, you know, what are some of the biggest issues for external researchers in working with state and local education agencies? You know, what are your biggest hurdles? And if you all can type into the chat pod or Q&A pod, if you have answers, we'll try to you know, address these. One quick question up here, what is the spelling of the data viewer you indicated your organization uses? Bethann, this is for you, the data viewer.
Logi XML. It's LOGI-XML.
Thanks for clarifying that. John, can you speak to how Florida engages researchers?
Sure, and understanding I'm not with them any longer, but I can tell you about some of the work we had done before I left. So Florida's had a lot of data for a lot of years, and so it's been a common place where researchers have come to ask for data. So one of the things that we did was try to figure out a way to leverage the researchers and also, you know, sort of contain the number, control the number of requests that were going on that were kind of overwhelming our data warehouse. And so what we did is we created a partnership between sort of a person, the head of, or a designee from each of the program offices within the department. You know, so maybe somebody from special education, somebody from ELL, somebody from, you know, private and independent schools, you know, those kinds of things. And then each agency or each group developed a series of sort of policy priorities. And we codified those into research topics and then said these are going to be the primary topics of the Department of Education. And we put those out and then basically created an open application process for external researchers, with the caveat that what we would do would prioritize research requests that fit in with the research agenda that had been identified. So, you know, if there's time, of course, we would love to give everybody the data, but there never is enough time. So it was a matter of saying which research requests best align to the research interests of the agency, and then prioritizing the work around that. So, you know, setting out that clear list of research priorities really helped focus and direct the kinds of data requests that we could fulfill. The biggest issues for the external researchers working with us was that, one, you know, we got far more requests than we could ever fulfill. A lot of data requests take a lot of time to develop, particularly when somebody wants an unusual set of connections between database tables or whatever. And so, and even when we could fulfill them, it might be 6, 8, 9 months in the queue before that. So external researchers really needed to understand the
limited capacity of the state to respond, and the fact that this is a low priority within the state. And so even if it's something that the agency is willing to do, oftentimes it's not something they can do quickly and easily. And then the other part of it is, the political side, which is when a independent organization is given data, and then they can go out and run analyses and come back with reports that may or may not match with what the agency's doing, that can often create consternation. And so they really need to think in terms of partnerships rather than thinking of the agency as sort of a source of good data that can be used to answer interesting questions. It really needs to be a two-way relationship, because the agency doesn't want to just give out data for the sake of only, sort of hearing about later what came of it, but for figuring out a way to make sure that information is used to drive policy and fits in within their priorities and interests.
Thanks, John. A quick question I saw flash and then I lost it was, has anybody done a cross-tab of the different research and policy questions that different states have identified? Not to my knowledge, but I think that would be a very useful tool, and might also help drive some cross-state, maybe a meta-analysis if there are overlapping questions. I think that's an interesting topic. We are about out of time. We need to wrap up. I want to thank all of you for your participation and your questions. I really appreciate Bethann and John and all of the participants today.
As do I, and we thank you very much for participating, and thanks to our presenters for providing a wealth of information to us around state longitudinal data systems. You'll remember in the overview and the introduction, I talked about a stakeholder feedback survey, and we're at the point that we would like to ask you to complete that survey. There is a pod titled Evaluation. Is it up there? Oh, yes. Okay, thank you. And if you would just click on the field where it says Browse To, there's a little button there. It says Browse To. If you would click on that, then the online survey will open in another window. And we really would appreciate you completing the survey in order to give us feedback about this webinar and future webinars and bridge events that we might offer. We're always looking for trying to maintain the relevance of what we're doing, and so if you complete these surveys, that would help us very much. And we'll show you the REL Southeast website as well. Please visit us. We do have a link there, as I mentioned earlier, to Ask REL Southwest, so you can ask questions of us, and we will look to find resources that are evidence-based to help you answer those questions. It shows who our research alliances are and the members of those alliances, so if you have some friends in your state, you might check and see if they're an alliance member and ask them about their experiences. We have a resources link, and also we publish a newsletter or e-bulletin called REL Southwest Spotlight. And you'll also see here is where we will put the archive of this particular bridge event, and under that bridge event, we also, under the resources for archived events, we also have an archive of our last bridge event that Dr. Jeffrey Wayman led for us, and he shared his expertise on the data-informed district. So that might be, there might be some resources there that you would like to access.
And please feel free to visit our website, and if you have any questions, you can do that. We have a direct way to ask questions straight of us, or you can use the Ask REL.
And then also note that both REL Southwest and Southeast are on Twitter, and so you can follow us there as well. And thank you so much for joining us today, and I hope you were able to access the evaluation. Again, it's the pod to the right of the PowerPoint. You select our state has an SLDS, now what, and then the Browse To should show, and you click that button, and the browser pops up with the URL to the survey that you can complete immediately.
For the REL Southwest and the REL Southeast, thank you all very much, and we look forward to seeing you in a subsequent bridge event later on this year. So thank you very much.